Hi, I'm glad to be here. Our area, planetary protection, is not nearly so imminent as that, although some people may feel it when it's happening. Next slide. So what I'm going to talk about today is planetary protection development and how do you move from where we are now with robotic missions to thinking about human missions. And there's a lot going on behind the scenes. Some folks may have heard that this planetary protection is being moved from where it is in the Science and Mission Directorate over to Safety and Mission Assurance. Part of the issue is that when you're starting to think about human missions, humans and robotic are in different parts of NASA, so this way it's overseeing them. And also there's a National Academy study going on right now on the process of developing planetary protection requirements. So there's lots of questions that go on, as well as we're sort of at a tipping point. We've been thinking a lot about robotic missions, and now all of a sudden we've got human missions, all to different locations and bodies out there, and also then you put commercial in there. So this is something where you can see that planetary protection, which falls in under the Outer Space Treaty, is something that changes over time. And so why talk to Survey about it? Because most of you people go to bodies where it doesn't matter. What I want to do is show you why today and talk about the path forward and give you an idea of some of the studies and workshops that you may want to be aware of, because not only are things changing, it's a good thing for you to keep in mind. It's an opportunity for technology challenges, science and technology fitting in and helping address some of these questions, and it's a path forward for all of us. Next slide. So one thing is to, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Educating, this is hard. Educating across the disciplines is an important thing, even for professionals. So I'm guessing that a lot of you may not have been aware of planetary protection. Planetary protection goes back to '67. Actually, it goes back before that to the Sputnik era, when the biologists were saying, if we go out to look for life, we can bring it with us on our spacecraft, so let's keep our spacecraft clean. The Outer Space Treaty has Article 9, which says that when you pursue studies of outer space, make sure you do it to avoid harmful contamination of where you're going, and also adverse effects on the environment of Earth when you bring things back. So it's forward contamination and back contamination. Article 6 also says that states are responsible for the activities in outer space, whether they're carried on by governmental agencies or non-governmental agencies. And the activities of non-governmental entities in outer space, including on the moon and other celestial bodies, shall require authorization and continuing supervision by the appropriate state party. The United States is a state party. There's over 104 nations that are states party to the Outer Space Treaty. Next slide. So really what we're talking about is responsible exploration. Oh, next slide. So the facts of it. Planetary protection applies to both robotic and human missions beyond Earth orbit. The policy applies to government agencies and academics and non-governmental entities. The policy has been revised over time as we learn more about the locations we're going to, the science about microbes and such, life beyond Earth, and the possibility of finding it. The good news is the places that most of you guys go to, the moon and most near-Earth bodies, are in a low concern category of concern. So Mars is the one that we're all talking about when we say human missions. So the moon, asteroids, cislunar space has perhaps documentation, but not a lot of requirements of such. So what we're saying, what's needed for planetary protection controls for human bodies beyond Earth orbit? And we need to blend the expertise of planetary protection, which has been robotic, with the expertise of human missions, which has been in low Earth orbit. How do we bring them together? And that's what's been going on for a long time now, for the past 5 years, actually. Many of you may not be aware of it. When we think about going to a space station, no planetary protection controls. We know there's microbes up there that's part of Earth orbit. When we go to the moon, the only time we've done it, Apollo 11, 12, 14 through 17. So in 1972, that was the last one. It's 250,000 miles away. The mission's 1 to 2 weeks. We're not so concerned about planetary protection up there. When we go to Mars, 50 million miles away, perhaps a 4-person crew, there's lots of issues that come up. And we say, what would be the needed planetary protection requirements and controls? Next slide. So COSPAR has already passed a set of principles. So it's the policy for planetary protection for human missions. And it's on the books as saying that the highest priority is safeguarding the Earth. So the round trip is the issue. Don't bring anything back that could be a problem. We can only do good planetary protection if the human-associated contamination is understood and monitored all the time. It will not be possible to conduct a mission entirely in closed systems, and it will be likely that humans will be exposed to Martian materials. This is, okay. So the implementation guidelines, and they're only qualitative guidelines. We have yet to do anything quantitative. Continuous monitoring and evaluation, a quarantine capability, protocols will have to be developed. Special regions, those areas with potential ices, will have to be protected. Robotic precursors will have to go into areas where we've not explored yet, so anytime before humans can go in. Planetary protection return will be anything that's touched the surface of Mars will have to be a Category 5 restricted Earth return. And a crew member should be assigned the responsibility for making sure during this long mission that planetary protection is maintained, just as you would have in a hospital where you're thinking about sterilization of materials and such. And the National Academy has repeatedly said, if we do it, and if you're not sure if there's life up there, take the conservative route and assume that there is. So what's this all got to do with survey? You guys, if I go through the program, you do dust, regolith, geology, telerobotics, instruments, analogs, simulations. We're getting into commercial activities and thinking about beyond Earth orbit. Mars, certainly you're interested in. It's miscellaneous small bodies and asteroids. If you look at the human mission planetary protection concerns, there's a tremendous overlap. I'll go through the workshops, but dust and their dissemination, the surface environment, landing sites, water ices, mobility, low latency telerobotics, all of the things really overlap very much. So what we're saying is you guys are the place where we can get a lot of the information. It also may be the place where you can start to think about extra funding. Not that planetary protection has a lot, but when there's research projects that go out, think about it. Within SETI Institute, there's a colleague of mine who works on dusts and atmospheric conditions, and she's now found out that she can work on planetary protection. So this has started earlier this decade. NASA said, how do we translate the COSPAR qualitative guidelines into requirements? And in 2012, the Planetary Protection Subcommittee said, we have to work together. We don't know enough now. 2013, they said, we have knowledge gaps we have to address. So rather than try to set regulations, what we're going to do instead is set a pathway. And so they did an NPI, NASA policy instruction, that will move towards an NPR, which will eventually be the requirements. And the idea is to facilitate developing capabilities to monitor microbial communities over time, develop technologies for minimizing or mitigating the contamination and its release, and understand environmental processes on Mars so that we understand dissemination, sterilization, and whatever could go along with the natural environment. And that's how we'll move forward. We've done other studies that started around 2000, and a series of studies including COSPAR and NASA, looking at all the different systems that are part of a human mission plan, and look at all the systems that are part of something that could be impacted by planetary protection, whether it's in equipment, decontamination and sterilization, reuse of materials, spacesuit designs and venting of the habitat, cleaning and maintenance of tools, all sorts of things that have planetary protection implications. And there's over 100 applicable studies, workshops, and such that have addressed these. So what I'm giving you guys is an overview of 3 recent workshops that have been held. The first one was held here at Ames in 2015, 85 attendees, looking at 3 specific areas: microbial and human health monitoring on Mars, technology and operations for contamination control, and natural transport of contaminants on Mars. This is the website, and talk to me afterwards if you want to get more information on the report. Basically what it did was develop 25 knowledge gaps. After assessing the situation, what do we have for information, and what are the research and technology development needs in the three key areas: human health and microbiology, technology and operations, and contamination and environmental conditions. Subsequently, COSPAR had another workshop, this one down in Houston. And it was a smaller workshop, but it said, can we refine the planetary protection information? Can we review the gaps that were identified, list them in priority order, and assess where and how they can be done? That article won't be ready until this fall. It's being produced by Gerhard Kmienick, who's the head of NASA Planetary Protection Panel. But if you look at it, one of the things they did, where can the research be done? Simulations, analogs, lab research, ISS, Moon, Phobos, Deimos, asteroids, cislunar space, and Mars. Do you think that maybe that sounds familiar to you guys? And the third one is an interesting one, a partnership that involves community working together, NASA plus a variety of folks that are thinking about commercial. And the last two workshops, 3 and 4, especially 4, looked at including planetary protection as a consideration. They've got big milestones to think about for sure. They call them the long poles, certainly entry, descent, and landing. Continued Mars reconnaissance, where is the ice, where are the good landing sites? Surface habitation and laboratory, there's nothing there, we've got to build it. So there's a lot of things that are important, but again, planetary protection fits in with all of those considerations, and that is the website for those workshop reports. In addition, there's collaborative prospects that have come out of it already. So during our times of discussion, one person who is an engineer down at Johnson said, well, what is the human microbiome inside space station versus outside? And it may surprise you, it surprised us. Nobody had ever looked at it. So then one of the microbiologists said, well, let's sample it. Well, you can't sample it. If you look for it outside during a spacewalk, you will find it because gloves and such are dirty. So it meant you had to first develop a tube, a special tool, just like you wouldn't take a Q-tip to do a strep throat. You have a special little device. So they made the device first, and they're going to sample inside and outside to find out what of the human microbiome goes up there. If you find out it all dies when it goes outside, there goes your planetary protection requirement. So that's the part of it. So it's not to tighten things, it's to say, do we need to worry about it? Another thing that's happened is some more movement on looking at DNA sequencing rather than the standard indicators and the old microbiological methods that are standard and useful, but may not be so helpful in space. So there's lots of alternative opportunities as we continue that path forward as outlined in the procedural instructions. It's going to be a long time before we can develop requirements. But there's a lot of research and technology gaps that can be addressed as sort of asides or complements to your own research. And they can help as we think about forward, especially in those locations where you don't have to worry about planetary protection requirements. You can do feed forward and testing on different bodies. So all of it together will help us develop more capable and effective science exploration for Mars in the years to come. So that's it. Did I do it? Okay, thank you.
Time for 1 or 2 questions, I think.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I might also say, while we're going for the questions, that what I talked about was planetary protection. There's another whole panel called planetary exploration. If you'll notice, this is about harmful contamination. We still don't have anything, and it's a different panel under COSPAR to say, how do you decide how you manage an environment? When the moon is nothing but a big rock, I know the geologists don't like it to call it that, but there's no anything there. It's not an ecosystem, it's an environment. So how do you look at that and decide where are the things worth protecting? Is it cultural? Is it historical? Is it scientific? And those areas have huge gaps. There are no regulations, no policies, nothing scientifically going in to help us set the criteria for that. So there's some areas we need to watch, because if there are folks that want to do mining, for instance, how do you do that? and think about our science. Yes, I'm sorry.
Christopher Grasso, Blue Sun Enterprises. I'm working with JPL on Next Mars Orbiter. And one of the difficult requirements that we're having to consider is sterilizing the sample return object down to 45 nanometer particles. That's what we've been given. I'm just curious, where can I track back where that requirement for that size came from? Because it kind of affects techniques we're going to try.
Okay.
You
Well,
know.
sample return doesn't have to sterilize every little thing. Maybe you can contain it in something
Well,
otherwise.
what happens is we have the outside of the canister, essentially, and we're being told, see what it takes to sterilize the near space around it to get rid of dust particles down to that before going in for rendezvous and capture.
Okay.
So I'm curious where that size came from that we're targeting.
Talk to me afterwards, and I'll get you the history of it. I'm not involved in the implementation. I am not a microbiologist. And so these issues and questions come back. There's areas where we need more research, but those data go back to historical things, and the National Academy is looking at it for NASA purposes.
Yeah, I figured it had a really good track. I just couldn't find out where that was.
Okay,
So
I'll
thanks.
help you track it down.
I'm afraid we'll have to cut off the questions there and
Okay.
move on to our next presenter. So our next presenter, I don't know